Welcome to Transformational Leadership, the podcast for leaders building high-performance organizations and teams. In every episode, you will hear from executives and transformation experts who've led with vision, executed under pressure, and delivered real, scalable, and impactful results. You'll hear practical insights and leadership stories from executives who've driven change, delivering transformation, and consistently winning in highly complex environments. No fluff, just frameworks, lessons, and stories from the front lines of leadership. If you're serious about building competitive impact through people, you're in the right place. Here is your host, Jeff Harnois.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Transformational Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Harnois. We have a really exciting conversation today, and I can't wait to share it with you. With over 38 years in the healthcare space, Shirell Rivers is the director of onboarding in the professional services space, enabling clients to have successful implementation with athenahealth. Early in Shirell's career, she spent 10 years in the Navy as an independent duty corpsman, which would more commonly be known as a physician's assistant out in the world, before launching her global career in healthcare. Shirell holds an MBA, but she also holds a law degree, and hopefully we'll get a chance to hear a little bit about that story. Her first exposure into major transformation happened in Saudi Arabia, understanding the connection between people and collaboration and stakeholders and change agents within the organization in an environment that included 24 different languages and cultures. In a male-dominated segment of the world. Hopefully we'll get a chance to hear a little bit about that experience as well. We'll also talk about a major transformation that's happening at athenahealth that's currently in phase 2. And so hopefully there'll be some really good and rich content for us to look at about phase 1 and learnings from there. We'll understand how she's driven by focusing on obsessing about the customer experience, how they measure that through NPS, and ultimately what the effects downstream are on the quality of healthcare that their partners can give. So with that, everyone, please join me in welcoming Shirell Rivers to the conversation. Shirell, it is wonderful to see you.
Oh, nice to meet you and see you too.
So, Shirell, tell me a little bit about, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear a little bit about the education journey. I know a lot of our audience, also hold advanced degrees, and ironically, a few folks in the HR community also hold law degrees. How did that happen for you?
So I during the pandemic, I was thinking about like how do I marry healthcare and all the regulations that come out and how it governs what we do. And I've always been that person that likes to understand like why do I do what I do and how come I have to do why I do it. So I'd always wanted to go to law school, and I took an opportunity during the pandemic to apply to law school, got in, and decided that's what my focus was healthcare regulations and policy.
If you don't mind me asking, I know academically the study of law requires a tremendous amount of memorization. There is a lot to know, especially if you're looking at historic cases and precedents, and that sort of thing. How did you manage that?
Well, I have a daughter who's an attorney as well. So a lot of that was she taught me some great study methods, taught me things that I needed to, all of her lessons learned going through law school on how to manage and maintain that information and to remember what key things do you really need to know. And it's really about knowing where to go and how to get it when you need it. It's not about holding it all in your head at once, right? Law school, you can't memorize every single case and everything that's out there, but you have to remember that major case and how do I go about researching and getting the information I need to leverage what I'm trying to present her.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how was law school as an adult?
It was tough. I'm not going to tell you it was tough because I don't learn the same way I did 15, 20 years ago. So for me, it was very different. Like I was a person who could read something once and it was down packed, memorized, I'm ready to go. Never had to like really find different ways to learn.
Had to work for it.
Yes, and before it was just easy breezy.
Yeah, I think of, younger people coming right out of high school, going into college and having a college journey versus, the way that I did it. I didn't go to college until after I had started my family and, working in a Fortune 50 environment and the demands that that brought and a marriage and a parent. It's tough.
It really is, and I actually was kind of fortunate because in my class, there was a lot of people my age. So a lot of us were
Mhm.
going back to law school. So it was kind of nice to be in a classroom with someone who was like, "Hey, I'm struggling learning too, just like you. I
Yeah.
don't I can't read something once and have it. Now I've got to read it, I got to write it, I got to see it, I got to hear it, all these
Mm.
different things to make sure I remember what I need to." But it was definitely a different experience because you bring a different perspective on the education you're learning once you've had some time in the workforce as well.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely one of the advantages of maybe deferring, and maybe the only advantage of deferring, higher education is that there's a maturity that comes with the learning process.
Yes.
I feel like, my depth of understanding and then having the contextual working world and experiences to apply to what was being taught and learned made the experience really rich.
It did. It was
Yeah.
very different than the first time around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Glad to hear it. I guess there's a little curiosity. You invested in, in law school, not only obviously from an economic standpoint, but a lot of brain cycles to get through a JD program. Are you using any of that today?
I am not at work as much as I do on my own time. But I do use it like when new things come out, I do go out and read things and bring in attention and put a different context around it for my team. So I
Hmm.
do use it in that sense, but I'm not
Hmm.
in our legal department at work.
Sure.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I mean that, and this may be obvious to everyone, but to me, it occurs that you're in a highly, highly regulated industry. And it's also a bit of a high stakes, or can be kind of a high stakes industry. And so I think, having that law foundation probably helps you make better decisions. I would assume. Is that true?
It helps me make better decisions, but it also helps me look at things from a very different perspective when I'm engaging with customers. I'm kind of walking that fine line about, okay, I really, this is some things we should think about. I think about risk differently than I did before.
Hmm.
That's probably the biggest thing is I really think about the risk of things or decisions that are made
Hmm.
before and maybe as I consult with customers or we're talking about setting things up a certain way or doing things a certain way, I may ask more detailed questions to make sure they think about those type of things.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
can't legally advise them, but we can at least get them thinking about, hey, you might want to talk to your attorney about that. You might want to
Uh-huh.
think about, like, is that the right way you want to go down? Or how do you want to set that up? Does that make sense? Do you have any risk
Hmm.
there? So that's
Hmm.
that's something. And then I love reading the right new things that come out from Congress or what's coming out to read those and look at the comments and see like how is that going to affect us from a product development stage as well.
A couple of things came up for me while you were talking about that. And again, I sometimes wonder if maybe people see it this way or not. But what I just heard you say is how you add value to Athena Health is you've invested and educated yourself. That allows you to be both an internal and an external consultant, even though that's not your job. I really love that framing because you're adding value to the organization. What I heard you say is, thinking about new products or maybe how you approach customers, being able to give that same bit of, consultative advice to customers or clients. Like, hey, you ought to think about this. What a brilliant gift.
Well, and it's also like when we talk about our larger type customers, we're a part of their strategic mission and vision, right? When they come to us and they want to know, like, how is Athena going to partner with us to make sure we hit our strategic goals and our outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and they expect us to show up and be there for them, right?
Hmm.
So you got to be able to think more about industry trends, all these things that are happening, to be able to help advise them and give them at least information for them to mull over and think about as they are designing their strategic vision for their
Yeah.
company.
Yeah. I also think about what you said about, watching what may be happening at, the Supreme Court level, or, how Congress is creating new laws, and then being able to understand that not only in its sort of current context, but how that may affect the future. Again, I think those perspectives, bringing that into a customer environment, is a high value proposition that I'm guessing wasn't required for the job, and yet here you are.
Yeah, we have a whole government affairs division, which is an amazing, they're the ones who go and do all that for us. But for me, like, I'm the geek who likes to read all this.
Right. Love it. Love it. Well, let's talk a little bit about your transition into Saudi Arabia. Um, this was, as I mentioned in the intro, sort of your first entree into the world of transformation. And it sounds like it was a really, really interesting and possibly challenging environment. I'd love to hear more about that.
All right. So the objective of the project was, I had been a consultant, and I was working as a consultant in the revenue cycle management portion of healthcare,
Okay.
helping physician practices look at, renegotiate their contracts with payers, look at their billing and saying, like, hey, you're not billing correctly. This is how you should be billing, really helping them build their revenue up. And I happened to be working with a breast oncologist who was from Saudi Arabia. And he and I worked together for about 2.5 years. And then he had to go back to Saudi Arabia to do his, they call it like your community service, or you have to give back. So he went back and he kept hounding me to come over there because they had this huge financial transformation they were trying to do at the hospital. And
Hmm.
I was like, I'm never moving to Saudi Arabia. I'm good. I appreciate you reaching out to me. But he kept talking to me, and I kept thinking, this might be a really great opportunity for me to learn beyond just consulting and add some things to my resume that I may not have the opportunity to do here in the US. So
Uh-huh.
the whole thing was about, it was myself and then a CFO from a hospital in Virginia. He ended up going to, and I was a program manager, and I had the coding experience and some of the other stuff that we needed from the financial side. And the whole thing was about rebuilding their financial system from homegrown billing codes to ICD-10 Australian codes, because at the time that's how Europe was working. They were working on the Australian ICD-10 codes.
Okay.
And so I had never done ICD-10 codes from Australia, but I knew CPT codes and all of that from here. I was certified and knew all that from the US. So ended up interviewing for the role, and they offered me the role, and I went, and it was the most transforming job I've ever had. First of all, the transformation of getting them from millions of homegrown codes to a structured ICD-10 code so they could build commercial insurances. That was the
Mm.
whole point. They weren't collecting enough money. They were leaving a lot of money on the table, and now they wanted to bring insurances into their hospital. But to be able to do that, they had to have standard codes. And
Mhm.
that was the whole purpose of the project, was to get them there, and then to train all the nurses and the physicians on how to bill and document to meet those coding requirements.
Can you help us understand some of the context here? Because this sounds like a massive initiative. How much of the revenue by percentage, was opened up to them at the end of this transformation?
At the
Or
end of that, they were able to collect over what they normally did. We found out they were leaving about $5 to $6 million on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
Mm-hmm.
just in like a 6-month period. That wasn't like
Wow.
total. That was in a 6-month period as we were evaluating the codes and crosswalking them to the correct ones. But by the
Mm-hmm.
end, they were able to then bill, I think they gained an additional 10 million in revenue by the
Mm-hmm.
time. And that wasn't something that was expected because the hospital was a charity for the king. So he wasn't really looking to get money, but
Mm-hmm.
it was they wanted to eventually be able to see other people and do more things internationally with that hospital. So that's why they were
Mm-hmm.
transforming it. But they were able to, and they had a whole new oncology center that they brought on board as well. So they were bringing in an additional at least 10 million by the time I left. They're probably doing way more now. But at that
Mm-hmm.
time, it was a 10 million on top of what they already were collecting.
Well, it sounds like to me, and it, absolutely tell me if I don't have this right. In that world, $10 million is actually not much money. It's not,
It's
it's
not. It's
probably,
not.
it's probably not even a rounding error. But the real strategic impact was it enabled this organization to have a global footprint.
Yes.
Is
And
that
they're
right?
And it actually did, because it connected them to the Doha. I don't know if you know it. There's a hospital there called Sidra, and so Sidra is then it allowed them to connect now with people in Doha, in Dubai, and a bunch of different other hospitals. So I'm pretty sure
Hmm.
now they are probably way above that. They are
Hmm.
huge, probably because it now allowed them to see patients and bill across multiple countries as well as connect their hospitals in a network.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So their hospitals are now like, it's not just I'm a standalone hospital, that the vision was way
Mhm.
bigger than me. I think that was the foundation to be able to then connect to other hospitals within the region.
Yeah, it allowed them entry into the ecosystem and be connected to that whole
Mhm.
system. I have to believe that that probably improved patient outcomes as well.
Patient care, absolutely. And then it opened up additional treatment options for them.
Hmm.
So you,
So, so wonderful outcome in the transformation. How did you think about it initially when you were approaching the role and the initiative? What were some of the big things that you noticed, big challenges or big opportunities perhaps?
the biggest challenges I was worried about was first was going to be communication style and how was I going to filter into that culture. That was my biggest challenge. I was worried about like, okay, I'm coming from the US. We look at work a lot differently than
Mhm.
Europeans and other people. And so how is my influence how am I going to influence people that are used to working a certain way
Yeah.
to be able to now hit deadlines, you've got to get this work done by this time.
Mhm.
We're now going to transform this. And then basically telling some people, like, I get that you developed this stuff, but this is no longer appropriate. And now we're moving to something new. So
Mhm.
worrying about feelings and how people feel about, calling somebody's baby ugly.
Right,
that
right.
that that was huge because finance people are very touchy about how they build things, how they manage finances. And then getting them to really see the other side when they had never seen the other side. Like, it was vaporware to them. They had never heard of these billing codes, and trusting me to lead them through to that was my
Mhm.
biggest fear. Was like, how am I going to get them to trust me to do this when they've never even seen it or heard it and even understand what I'm talking about because they've
Right.
never done this before.
And so how did you approach that? How did you solve for that?
Well, one of the things I did is I made sure that I did a lot of show me in the beginning. So initially, like showing them, educating them on what CPT codes or ICD-9 codes were, like, especially with the providers, and like, this is what you're capturing for this type of anatomy. This is what you're doing for this billing service. This is what this means. And then how do you connect that to a dollar amount for finance? Like, why do I need to connect that to a dollar amount? But doing a
Mhm.
lot of education up front. So myself and the like I did that, and the CFO was working on the finance people,
Mhm.
trying to get them to understand that these codes are just, they're going to translate to money in the end with the insurance company,
Mhm.
and showing them how that works with the
Mhm.
contract, right?
So what I'm hearing, and again, correct me if I don't have this exactly right, but it sounded like first of all, you created an alignment in alliance with others in the organization, in this case, some subject matter experts, the CFO. But you were able to connect the tactical change that you were looking for with the strategic vision to justify the change. Do I have that right?
That's correct. And then I also learned I had to also be a part of them. So in the US, we come to work and we work, right?
Hmm.
We work and we try to get to know our coworkers, but they're huge on relationships in the Middle East.
Ah.
Very huge on relationships. They don't want to just jump into work and get stuff done.
Ah.
They want to know about you. You need to know about them. They're huge on relationships. So I had to really, that was an out of comfort zone for me. So I had to
Yeah.
learn how to not come to work. I had to spend time with people outside of work. I had to go to people's houses when invited for dinner, you know, because that was their way. They are very much family oriented and very much relationship driven. Things are built
Mhm.
on relationships, not about what you know or what you can do. It's
Mhm.
about, how do I feel about you? How do I trust you?
Ah.
And so that was huge for me to learn how to influence that organization. I couldn't just show up as me. I had to really get out of my comfort zone. And when somebody says, "Hey, you're new and I want you to come to dinner at my house tonight," I'm like, "Oh my God, I gotta go." And
Yeah.
I made some
Yeah.
really good friends because when they come to the US, they always stop by and see me. But it was super important because if they didn't like you or didn't feel like you were a good relationship, you didn't go far.
Wow. I'd like to dig into this just a little bit because I have my own curiosity is sort of taking over. And some of the work that we do in my firm is really focused on relationship building and understanding there's a transactional component, but there's a relational component, and how do we find the right balance between those things. So thinking about that on a global scale, or in this case a regional scale in Saudi Arabia, there's the idea of spending time together outside of work, building the connection, building the relationship. But tell me about the depth of that. During those times, are they really trying to learn deeply about you and your origin story and things that we might consider a little more vulnerable? Or is it just a matter of spending time and having a good time together? How would you describe the relationship building process or mechanism there?
I actually think for me, it was a genuine relationship. They
Okay.
wanted to know about you personally, like who you are, what do you value, what do you bring to the table, like who's your family. Like they were, because
Wow.
I flew, because what happened is I flew out before my family came, because they bring you out first. And so I was there a month before my family came out. And
Mm.
so for them, they were like, okay, like you don't have your family here.
Mhm.
And I am still really good friends with these individuals,
Yeah.
and it is, they were truly interested in who I was. They weren't interested in the superficial. They truly wanted to understand, like, what do you believe in? What do you value? How does that align to what we do? Because
Mhm.
what they do is they care for people first and process second. They're not huge process people. They're about people and how
Yeah.
those people fit into the systems.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's where I learned as a leader that it's not about a process, it's
Yeah.
about people within the process.
Yeah.
And
You're you said this earlier, and it's exactly right. Our approach to work and our work ethic is not the same as it is in places like Europe. And I actually don't know that much about the Middle East. I haven't had the opportunity to do any client work there, but yeah, I mean there is a bit of a uniqueness to how we approach work, and I'm certainly not one saying that it's better how we do it. I think we probably have a lot of room to grow here, and the second thing that you said that came up for me is I'm still friends with them. Well, that's what happens when you build real
Mhm.
relationships, right?
Yeah.
They supersede the work connection, and they last beyond that. So what an interesting perspective. I also think that just again, the rattling through my brain a little bit, your family wasn't there. It feels like they were kind of taking you in the absence of your family initially. Was that did you have that
It
same
it
sort of
really
experience?
it really was because, I think when people hear the Middle East, they get there's this perception that as women, we are there and, you don't get to do as much and you're kind of sheltered and all these things. And that was my fear going,
Mhm.
because I'd never been there. Not in a way that I've been there from a military perspective, but not
Right.
there from any other kind of perception.
Mhm. As a
And
professional.
as a professional, so what I learned is they're very protective of women, right? They want you to be safe. They want you to have, their women are very, very well educated. I mean, they spend a lot of money educating their women.
Mhm.
And I was working along this young lady who was like 10 years younger than me, and she already had a doctorate degree. And she
Wow.
and she was phenomenal. And that was one of the young ladies I was really close to. And like I said, like I would go to her house and that's where I would go, and, she had her whole wing in the house. But
Mhm.
it was amazing to me how much her fathers and her brothers were so concerned about, like, making sure you're safe, making sure you do this, making sure you get to meet the dreams you want to meet. And so for me, it was a very huge eye opener that this is kind of actually a really flourishing place for women if you really are there and do it. Looking in from the outside in, you don't know, but when I was sitting in the middle of it, I was able to do things there that I would have never been able to do in
Can
the
you give me an
US.
example of one of those
Well,
things?
just leading a project with 24 different nationalities sitting around a table. I walk into
Mhm.
a room and I'm giving my updates and I'm running that whole project, and they trust me to do that
Mhm.
as a program manager. I'm not some executive, but I'm the
Mhm.
program manager. And you're looking at me and letting me and manage all the different parts of what needs to be done. I could have never, even today, you can't do that in some places. There are certain people, everybody has a role, and you have to live that role at work.
Mhm.
And you're lucky if you get to step outside of that and do
Mhm.
other things, but it
Mhm.
doesn't happen that way. Like in Saudi Arabia, it was about they just wanted to who can get the work done.
Love that. Love that. Gosh, that's definitely the right way to do it. That sounds like a phenomenal experience, and it sounds like one that just as the hearing you talk about it, it sounds like you've got some really fond memories of that.
Yeah, and it was life changing for me as a leader. That's what I probably grew in that year and a half, 5 or 6 years for in a career perspective by being
Yeah.
allowed to do things that I would have never been able to do here.
What's the I don't mean to put you on the spot here. Out of that, what sounds like a very compressed experience, you said you got 5 years or 6 years worth of growth out of a 1.5 year tour of duty. What's one thing that transformed you as an individual or as a professional from that experience?
It taught me how to think without emotion.
Oh my goodness, that's a big one.
So
Tell
that
me
was
more.
that was probably the biggest thing I learned was to think without emotion. So when you're talking about problem solving and trying to get to a resolution, when you're working, like I said, with 24 different nationalities, there's a lot of cultural things that come to the table, and people get heated, and I learned
Mm,
how to lead by, like, solve solutions by being fact driven instead of emotionally driven. And so if
mhm,
I'm the more person in the room that's not all emotional, and I can just talk about the facts, like, this is the fact, this is the fact, this is where we're at, this is what we need to get done, it always brought the temperature down.
yeah, yeah,
And people weren't then picking on each other and their perspective, they were focusing on the facts. And so
mhm,
that is one of the things that I think I learned the most was, like, in when you've got tons of disagreement, if you can focus on the facts, you can get to a resolution without people's feelings getting hurt. Because then you're not
mhm.
picking on the person, you're picking on the data and the facts, and now let's solve for it.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, that's outstanding. What a great piece of wisdom to share. I'd love to talk about this more, but I also want to talk a bit more about what's happening at Athena Health today. I know that you've got a major transformation that is in progress there, and you are now in phase two. And in my intro, we talked a little bit about obsessing about the customer. We talked a little bit about the measurement component through NPS. And we also talked about the connection to what you're doing and how that might lead to better health outcomes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So about a year ago or a couple of years ago, we really wanted to be better partners with our customers during the implementation process. You want to make sure they realize their value sooner, that they are up and on the system in a way that is being financially responsible for them and have better outcomes for their patients.
Mhm,
And so as we were looking at our implementation process, there were some changes that we made to be able to increase our, lessen our cycle time, but also how do we take mundane work off of the customer that we could be doing, and freeing them up to really focus on what matters is the patient
mhm,
and all those type of things. And so last year we went to this major transformation. We kind of did a little bit of a reorg internally, changed some teams around, and really spent some time figuring out what does that look like. And
mhm,
the transformation, did we learn from it? Yes, we did. Was it perfect? No, it wasn't. But
mhm.
I still think at the end of the day, we did learn a lot, and we still got to where we wanted to get to.
Tell me about the lessons, and this is one of the areas that I think people are tuning into this podcast for. What did you learn, and what did you do with those lessons?
Well, I think that what we learned is communication is key at all
Mhm,
levels.
mhm,
And then keeping people on the North Star. Like, how do you keep people that are in the midst of the transformation
mhm,
understanding what the North Star is? Like, what are we really trying to accomplish?
mhm.
Because we all know that transformation is messy, right?
Yeah,
And
every time, every time.
it's messy. So how do we keep people focused on that North Star? And then we know that technology and the process matter, but people determine the success.
Mhm,
And that's something we learned too, is that, we can come up with the best processes, we can skin them all
mm.
down, we can do all these things, but the people who are doing the work and actually have to execute are the ones that are going to determine if it's successful or not.
I wanna pause here, Shirell. That is one of the most important observations that anybody in or around or leading or participating in transformation must know. You can have the best strategy, you can have the best plan, you can have the best intention behind the transformation that you're about to engage in. If you don't invest in the people side of the transformation, which is understanding strengths and leveraging those, understanding blind spots and shoring those up. And one of my other, this is the sort of the world according to Jeff. We want to create an opportunity for people to win and to be successful. And so are we building that into the people side of transformation where we're setting them up to win along the way? That creates what I think is a resiliency for when things go wrong, because they're going to go wrong. It happens every time. But back to this sort of philosophical perspective, you can have the best strategy, the best plan, the best intention. If you don't invest in the people side of the transformation, your transformation is at risk of not being successful.
And
Yeah,
I
it
think
sounds
the
sounds
other
like you
thing,
learned that.
oh, we did. I think, but it's up to us leaders too then to step in and make sure our teams are focused and understand and this is something, like I said, I learned too during this is you got to celebrate the small wins too, because in the middle of those in its transformation, we're also trying to do our day job. And
Right.
we got to keep the lights on. So you got to keep doing that work. And then you also got to deal with all the change that's happening that's affecting the daylight work, right?
Another really, really brilliant insight, Shirell. There are in major transformations, there's usually not that many people whose job is transformation. A lot of people involved in the transformation have regular work that they're supposed to be getting done, that there's expectations that they're going to get done. And the transformation now becomes an added initiative that they have to invest in.
And so
And
that's why I think if we celebrate those small wins, because people need to see that the transformation that you're doing is truly impacting the work. So
mhm,
we can talk about it on paper, we can put it on PowerPoint slides, we can talk about it in town halls, we can do all these things. But if the front line can't understand how it's impacting and see that it's impacting the work they're doing, they get
yeah,
discouraged. And
yeah,
so that's why it's important to sell it. Like when you have a win and something like, let's say you automated something that used to be manual, that you got to highlight that to the
yeah,
people that are doing the work. So they say, oh my God, it was worth this because now I'm not manually doing this. And we
yeah,
did a lot of automation stuff and, bringing AI into stuff. And it's amazing. But if people don't know about it or they can't really hear it because there's so much working so hard, you've
yes,
got to bring that to that. And then I think relationships too, you have to lean on your cross-functional relationships and your
right,
peers.
yeah,
And I think, one of the things that we have, I really love that our leadership stayed so involved in this, because one of the things that our chief customer officer, Chris Condrat, said a lot was it's all about relationships internally and externally. They
mhm,
are what matter and get things done.
mhm.
You can't do it alone. You have to have that team.
Yeah, there's a there's a saying that every once in a while rattles in my head. It's if you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you have to go together. And I think about that as a quantity over quality kind of matrix. If you really want to have high impact in highly complex types of environments and complex projects, you got to be able to bring the team together. And what's the foundation of the team? The relationships that are in place.
Yep. And then I know we talked a little bit earlier about being a bit messy, but you have to embrace the mess
You
as
do.
well. You you have to, because it's going to be messy. It's going to happen again, and that's okay.
Hmm.
And that's something that I think as a leader, that was kind of my responsibility with
Hmm.
my team, is to remind them it's never going to be perfect. And because people we're going to have the minimally viable product right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
We're going to get to the perfect later, but we're
Right.
learning, we're learning, we're piloting, we're figuring things out. So that is where I think, that we had to do there. And then I think you have to measure twice and transform once, right?
Oh, I
Assumptions
love
about
that. Ooh, I love that one. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm absolutely gonna use that.
right. So assumptions are about, you have assumptions, but they could be wrong. And so that's
Hmm.
why you've got to keep measuring to make sure. And
Hmm.
then you only want to transform once. You don't want to keep basing
Yeah.
things off of that. So that's kind of what I learned. I think are the big things out of that transformation.
Gosh, it's
And
so much wisdom in those perspectives. A couple of things are coming up for me. This idea of, measure twice, transform once. The big impact of that is you're going to minimize the fatigue of people if we get it right more than we get it wrong. That's one thing. The other side of that, though, is when things don't go as planned, and you can predict that that is going to happen. Maybe not where and maybe not when, but if you don't have an allowance in place, and really what I'm talking about here is a mindset, and ultimately what I'm saying is having a growth mindset, which means we know that things are going to go wrong. It's not the end of the world. It may not be our desired outcome. Our approach should be minimize the fallout, certainly protect customers and revenue sources during the process. We want to prioritize those things. But then we want to lean in on what can we learn from this thing? That's the payoff for when things don't go right. What can we learn from it and how can we make it better going forward? And I think if we have that mentality, then what happens is people have a tendency to be a lot less defensive when things don't go right. And that opens up, better thinking, better ideas, better approaches for the right reasons versus, oh, I'm trying to CYA or I'm trying to protect my turf or yeah, all of that. And so the advice from my perspective into the leadership of transformation is exactly that. Set an expectation. You don't want it, but you know that things are not always going to go right and that you expect a resiliency in stepping up and sort of cleaning up the problem and then learning from it. That makes the messy part of transformation, um, the payoff is much higher. I think that's the perspective I have.
Yep.
Yeah. Good. Well, Shirell, I have to tell you, I've enjoyed the conversation really, really, and I expected this from the first time I met you. Really, really good insights. The way you think about it, the way you've approached it, and then what you've extracted from those experiences, really good. So, thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you a couple of questions I ask all of my guests, and feel free to have some fun with any of this if that's appropriate. Um, One of my favorite questions is, what was the best piece of advice you received and didn't take?
I I think the advice I didn't take was to go to med school
Mhm.
because I was a science. I love science, and
Yeah,
I did nursing school,
right.
and I did, when I was in nursing school and as a nurse in the Navy, after doing all that, I I had been told by a physician that, why don't you go to med school? You'd be a great doctor. And I never took that advice to do that. But I work with a bunch of doctors all the time.
Right, right. So I have a couple of questions, Cheryl. The first one is, why didn't you take it? And just from your perspective, why did it matter to not take it?
I didn't take it because honestly, I think it was fear. Like, what if I couldn't do it?
I love the self-awareness here. I love that.
That was probably the biggest thing, is the fear
Mhm.
of, could I really? I think they probably believed in me more than I believed in myself at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. And
And
I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm betting in retrospect, you realize you could have done it.
I do. That's why I regret it.
I see. I see.
Because I had a mentor in the Navy. He was a physician and an attorney,
Uh-huh.
and he did both. And so I really admired him, and I thought he was an amazing. And he's the one who told me that I should have went to med,
Okay.
and
All
I
right.
didn't because I was afraid of failure. I was younger, and I was
Yeah.
afraid, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. I don't want to
Mhm.
fail.
Yeah, yeah, yep. I think we see that in younger generations typically and traditionally anyway. There seems to be an over-indexing on, on fear of failure and how paralyzing that is with the younger generations today. And so I think, again, your story is really brilliant. In retrospect, you realize that you 100% could have done that, and that's where you
Yeah.
would be today. But,
Mhm.
in contrast, it still looks like you are doing really, really great and interesting work.
I like what I do. I think we are making a difference in the
Mhm,
healthcare space. I think Athena is one of the only companies out there doing what we do. And
mhm,
we put our customers first, and we are looking at ways to make them be able to practice without all the noise.
mhm, mhm. We talked a second ago about the younger generation. What advice would you give if you could walk into a room, an auditorium filled with people, and I don't exclusively mean younger people. I mean people who are maybe new to healthcare. What advice? If you could only say one thing to them that would help them or ensure their success, what would it be?
I think there's a couple of things, and I've heard this from some other people before too, but I live by this is leading with both strategy and compassion and building systems that outlast personalities.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
I have somebody that I really respect says that a lot, and I
Mm.
agree with that second. I think she's amazing. Dr. Atoya Hodges, she says that all the time. Is when you build something, it has to outlast the personalities that were there.
Shirell, I have a leadership workshop coming up with one of my clients, and I am 100% going to use that to help frame the workshop. I love that. Okay, same question, but now, for people that might be in your peer group or at your level, what's one a piece of wisdom that you would want to reflect on with them? Again, something that they may a perspective they haven't had, or something that would contribute to their success. What would that look like?
This is something that I do, and I when peers ask me this, I suggest it all the time. You should always add to your toolkit every year
Yeah,
because that's going to make you better and see things from a different perspective. It helps me look at problems holistically than just
Mhm.
based off of the experience I have.
I love that. You absolutely bringing more value to the table through, I think of it as continuous learning, but it's also sort of upskilling and, focusing on competency development going forward and then learning. I love that. Well, Shirell, what an enjoyable conversation. Rich, really rich. And I'm anxious for the world to be able to partake in this conversation. What would be a good way for people to reach you if they wanted to have a further conversation?
Oh, they could reach me via LinkedIn. I think that's a perfect way to get a hold of me. I'm at Shirell. It says Shirell Rivers, and oh, you got the link right there.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, perfect.
yeah. And you're open to people contacting if they've got questions or perspectives?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Shirell, thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege to spend this time with you today. I'm grateful for your content and your contribution.
Great. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
The Transformational Leadership Podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes vision, action, diagnostics, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, be sure to let us know in the comments. We'd love you to join the conversation and help us transform the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are transforming organizations, leaders, and teams. In the meantime, be sure to like, subscribe, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.